Today we're going to talk about why you're probably getting tired of your own work and how to set yourself apart from the rest. What's going on, everyone? My name is Tom from Dreadlabs. Welcome back to, I think, already the 20th episode of the Dreadlabs podcast in total. But I think this is episode 9 of season 2. Not sure, doesn't matter. Anyways, welcome back. Hope you've been doing well. This topic of today comes from some DMs that I've gotten, and also it's a little bit of a deeper dive into our last topic. If you have not checked that out yet, it's basically why you're not getting any clients. And I'm giving very new beginners in the design or visual art space a couple of pointers to look for the reasons why they're not finding any clients. And this kind of is something similar, I guess. I don't really want to focus on the client aspect, but more on the mental aspect of this. When people reach out to me and ask me about this, I usually tell them that they're stuck in aesthetic. And that's also something that we've recently talked about. But stuck in aesthetic basically means that you keep creating the same thing over and over and over again. And I've done this for a very short time, but I remember at some point getting to a point where I was like, oh, wait, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. And I find that I'm not really enjoying what I'm creating anymore. And this was when I was doing, I think I've done like 12 self-contained artworks in the course of 2 weeks or something like that. And looking at the people who usually ask me this question or talk to me about this in my DMs, those people have been doing the same thing over and over again, sometimes for months on end. And then we're talking maybe about hundreds of artworks sometimes. And the reason this is happening is you're either not thinking ahead to evolve, or you don't know how to grow. And with grow, I mean learn new things. So there's two ways to keep going ahead and evolve as a designer, I guess. And that's learning new skills, but also thinking ahead on what your goal is. And that can be finding clients, that can be just becoming better at mastering your craft. It can also be build a decent following or a community. Maybe you want to sell courses yourself or asset packs or whatever. The main thing is that you think ahead and plan for your goals, I guess. That might be a good topic for another episode, but for now we're going to focus on the first part, and that's learning new things. So I don't think there's anyone out there who has watched all of my tutorials on my channel. Obviously, all of the things that I've recorded on my videos, I have learned myself at some point in my life. And it can be that I learned some things through other tutorials, I experimented myself, or I don't know, maybe I just got told someone something. I'm not sure. I don't know really know where I find all of the inspiration for my tutorials from, because there's so many. But if there was a person who would follow all of my tutorials and just start designing all of those things based on my tutorials, at some point they would also get stuck in aesthetic, I guess. And the reason why that usually is because 99% of the designers in this space at this point are following tutorials on YouTube, applying the knowledge that they learn from those tutorials to their own designs, and then they just repeat that. And they don't really take the next step, and I think that's because they don't really know what the next step is supposed to be, because a lot of them just follow along with the tutorial and there's no tutorial to help them like dive deeper into getting better, I guess. Of course, there's some tutorials for a certain effect that maybe take 5 minutes, show you how to do it, and then the video ends. And then there's the same tutorial from another channel which dives deeper. Maybe it'll take 40 minutes and they explain a little bit further into the technique or something like that. But after those 40 minutes, it kind of stops. And from a personal perspective, I usually, of course, when I watch tutorials, I encounter the same thing. That just happens. It's just out there and there's no need to worry about that. But the thing is, you need to move on in order to grow and learn new things and become better at doing this. For example, I did a lot of ray flyer tutorials in my day. I learned how to do them, I think mostly myself, but also like watching Pinterest and stuff like that. But once I learned about ink bleeds, displacement maps, it kind of was like out there and I didn't really evolve anymore. And at some point I thought, okay, I know how to make a ray flyer based on what the end result of this and that tutorial looks like, but I still think it doesn't really look like the perfect ray flyer. It's either due to the textures, the ink bleeds, maybe there's something else in terms of processing that I don't really get. Maybe there's a little bit of composition that I don't really get. And this is where you have to take a deep dive into aesthetics. So rather than finding new tutorials on the same topic, go and find actual reference images in the highest quality possible. And if you want to do 80s movie posters, go to archive.org or go to your, maybe even to your local like vintage store and buy these VHS tapes. Try to find the inspiration from the source. You can try Pinterest, of course, that also helps, but I recommend doing a deeper dive into what it is you want to make and if you can acquire some of those things. In my case, I bought, I think, over 100 old school ray flyers from the late 90s and early zeros. I bought 4 or 5 books, I think, on the subject, which if you want to check out which books those are, I have a couple of videos on them, but I'll name them real quick. So I have Rave Art by Chelsea Louise Berlin, Barcelona Club Flyers, Rave Flyers by Masala Noir, and I'm blanking on another one, but next to those books I also have maybe 4 or 5 Pinterest boards with all kinds of different Rave Flyers. One of those boards is more based towards airbrush artwork, one of them is more based towards composition and like ink bleeds and stuff like that, because they are more these really bright duotone Rave Flyers, I guess. And the other ones are a little bit of a mix of both and maybe some experimental stuff as well. So once you have your material, just go browsing until you find something. And usually you find one of these flyers or designs or whatever, and you're like, wow, this one really stands out to me. This one is done really perfectly. I really like how this looks. And at first you can't really put your finger on it, because usually you're just continuing browsing. For example, when you're just doing this on Pinterest or when you're just doing this on Instagram, you just scroll further. And that's because these platforms aren't built to have you focus on one thing and then just quit. They want to keep you scrolling. So let's say I'm holding one of my Ray Flyer books and I see a flyer that really stands out to me. What I should do is basically open it and zoom in on it and even take notes, not in the book, on your own sketchbook or whatever, on what it is that makes that stand out. So what I usually do is I write down the page number and I go like, okay, the bleed between the title and the background color is really nice here. What's happening there? Or why is this grain so good? This grain texture. Or I don't know, something about this icon really stands out. I'm not sure what it is. I don't really write it down that detailed, but just to give you an idea on what I have in my head when I write it down. And if you have the time, of course, you can really dive into that straight away, but usually I just write them down. And then once I have some time left, I go back into this and I just go and I just keep looking at that image and trying to see what it is and try to determine what grain they used or what the blend mode of that grain might be, or maybe it's some type of paper that they printed on, and then I go research like whatever paper they used back in the zeros to print club flyers on. And this way you can go and deep dive into what makes an aesthetic an aesthetic. And once you start understanding that and learning what it is, try to recreate it. And I don't mean you're going to recreate a Ray flyer and you're going to just post it on Instagram. No, just dive into that grain texture. Only that grain texture. And don't share it with anyone else. This is just for you. Once that social media pressure comes around the corner, you're just going to do something and you're going to rush it because you need to post it on Instagram. That's not the case here. Just do it for yourself and try to perfect it. You know, go back to it in different days. See if there's anything that you should have done differently. And if it's possible, work with smart objects so you can just still go back into the settings that you use. Maybe there's something there that really helped out create that certain setting, and you cannot really find that if you rasterize everything. And of course, you now, by watching a couple of tutorials, you know how to do an ink bleed, you know how to create textures in Photoshop by either scanning them in yourself or maybe even adding grain through different methods and filters in Photoshop. And once you know how to do this in Photoshop, you know the techniques, the tools to use, you can use those tools in order to perfect it and get that perfect grain or get that perfect inbleed, if that makes sense. Another tip that I can give you is sometimes you're looking for a certain effect or tutorial and you want to apply that to something that's very specific to you. And sometimes you get stuck because you cannot really find the tutorial you're looking for, and then you just blank on it. An example of this is a couple of months ago, I think, I wanted to do a Sherpa jacket in Cinema 4D. And I'm using Octane renderer, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a Sherpa wool material in Cinema 4D and Octane. And if I started looking for Sherpa jacket or whatever, I didn't get any tutorials on that subject. And the thing is, sometimes you just have to look for a certain different effect and learn through those tutorials how you can apply those things for the thing that you need. For example, in my case, I watched a tutorial on a hair material in Octane. So this was a tutorial on how to create like hairy text, I think. And that hair didn't really look like Sherpa wool at all. But in that tutorial, I learned a little bit more on how the hair material worked in Cinema 4D. And then I found another tutorial on how to do sheep wool or something like that. And that sheep wool wasn't an Octane tutorial, but I learned about how to like make frizzy hair and clump it a little bit, like you can see on Sherpa wool and on like wool in general, I guess. And then I watched another tutorial on how to apply Octane materials to your hair material in Cinema 4D. And with all of those three tutorials combined, I was able to do a Sherpa material for Cinema 4D and Octane. So those two research methods, I guess, are a couple of ways in order to deep dive into aesthetic and let you become better at what you do. And the thing is, because you're diving deeper into learning more and doing things better, the first thing that happens is, of course, your designs will look better instantly. And I don't know if any of you can see this, but usually if I see a design, you can see a difference between a design that has been made by following a couple of tutorials, or whether it's a design that has more time put into it. You can see that someone has perfected a texture or a composition or whatever. And I don't know, you can really see the difference. And one really obvious example of that, I'm not sure if people know what I'm talking about now, but you see these molten text things where like there's a bleed of like the text going down the bottom. This is one of those tutorials I think that popped up back in 2020 or something, and it had like 500,000 views within a couple of months, and everyone was copying this tutorial. And every time I see something like that, I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's that tutorial. You know, you don't see anyone's personal creativity or mastering a certain technique in there. It's just a tutorial. And it's fine, of course, but that's not the point of this video. The point of this video isn't to talk shit about someone for following a tutorial. The point is how to get further than that tutorial and how to get more motivation out of doing your design work. If it's obvious to me, it's probably obvious to a lot of potential clients or other designers that want to learn from someone else. When someone mastered a certain technique, it's very easy to see that compared to someone who's just a beginner. So using these methods will let you differentiate from 99% of the other designers, I think, maybe even higher percentage. And that's just because, of course, nowadays the market is really oversaturated, but you got to remember, like, most of all of those people out there are just, at this point, people who are just following tutorials. So if you start doing this, you'll get ahead of a lot of the competition. And that's also something that I want to give away as kind of like a motivation. The bigger you'll become, or the better you'll become at something or some technique or on social media or whatever, the smaller the competition will be. And what I mean by that is, okay, I'm going to give you another example. It's kind of related, but not really. Once in a while, I check out my YouTube channel stats on socialblade.com. That's a website that basically rates your social media profile, and it says how many videos you have, how many views. It has some future projections, but also things like it can rank you based on how many subscribers you have compared to the rest of the world. but also compared to the rest of the people in your country. And I don't really know the exact numbers, but let's say when I was at 30,000 subscribers, I was at number 4,000 of my country. I was in the top 4,000 of YouTube channels in terms of how many subscribers they have here in the Netherlands. Let's say that there's 1 million YouTube channels here in the Netherlands. That means that I'm ahead of 996,000 of those, if I can calculate correctly. And once I started growing more, for example, I think I am now in the top 600 now that I'm nearing 100K. And that means that by growing, like there's even more channels behind me. So there's always less people in front of you than behind you once you start to become better at something. So to loop this back to what we talked about in this podcast episode is if you are just a beginner and you followed a couple of tutorials in Photoshop, then you're at a level where maybe 2 million other designers or aspiring designers are at that moment. Once you start getting better, you will differentiate that, and let's say you're at a higher level now, that means that you've surpassed all of those 2 million designers. And the cool thing is, if you're listening to this, or if you're watching this, or if you're watching any other video on this topic, that means that you're already ahead of all those people who are not watching. Because it's kind of obvious, this video will never get 2 million views. Or this podcast episode will never get 2 million listens. So that means that by doing this and applying this technique, you're already going to be ahead of 2 million of those people. And once you're ahead of those 2 million people, there might be, 500,000 in front of you, but once you get better and better, that number will slightly go down every single time you get better at something. Of course, there's also other people getting better, but there's also a lot of people getting into the craft and new at that thing. You see what I mean? I kind of hope that makes sense. I'm not sure. In my head, I think it's really clear, but it might be a little bit confusing. If that's the case, don't be afraid to reach out either on the comments down below if you're watching this on YouTube, or send me an email, or reach out on Discord and we can discuss it a little bit further. But I really do think that that's the way to get ahead of the competition, but also to become better at your craft. And the most important thing, actually, what we started this episode with is how to get over feeling sick or tired of your own work. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching. This is Tom from Dreadlabs tuning out. Hopefully see you guys in the next episode. And for now, have a nice day.